In this video, I intend to share facts, and hopefully only facts, concerning this whole COVID-19 pandemic. At any point in time, if I share any opinion of my own, I'll be sure to kind of mention that so that way you know I'm not just talking out my ass here, right? But then I'm actually sharing information that allows for you as a free-thinking individual to come to your own conclusion. So you don't just believe one side of the media that supports your own narrative, your own bias, your own ideologies, your own political leaning, but at the end of the day, you have enough facts and evidence, right, to come to your own conclusion and create your own informed opinion about this whole pandemic that's really going on. So a little over a week ago, I had to fly down to Fresno for some business, Fresno, California. And this was a little over a week ago. I fly there through a Delta airline. The airports weren't busy. The airline, Delta was not busy. They allowed for a seat in between each person, taking those precautions. That's fair. But then about 3-4 days ago on my flight back, they told me, hey, you're not allowed on the plane now. And this is months into this whole pandemic. I cannot believe how late the response has been. And so they said, you're not allowed on the plane without a mask. And I was like, well, I don't have a mask. They're like, here you go, here's your mask. Now, I wanted to be respectful of the airline. They, reserve the right and the freedom not to put me on their plane if they choose to, if I don't want to wear the mask. But I just figured, heck, it's a little late, but I'm not gonna let my ego and my views and my opinion keep me from my flight home just to be right. So I get on the flight, everyone's wearing a mask. I look to my right, and this was shocking. Everyone has their mask, but there was this one lady who looked like she was in her mid-30s, just covered head to toe, goggles, face mask, the thing over her mouth. And it was really interesting because I saw her pull out some fruit snacks, the type that you get like from Costco. She opens the package and proceeds to meticulously wipe every single fruit snack, every single individual one, with a disinfectant wipe. And I thought to myself, I cannot believe what I'm witnessing. That's probably worse for her to consume that, the disinfectant, for fear that someone may have touched it in production, than it is for her to get the stupid virus, which is, yes, very similar to the flu. It's a coronavirus, okay? So it was shocking to me. And I thought to myself, is this what the world has come to? People are living in literal fear for their life. And now when I get to state the numbers, is this fear warranted? Is it warranted for media outlets to constantly publish these stories? I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I get the newspaper physical in the mail every single day. And over the last 60 to 70 days, about 45 to 50 of those, okay, I feel like they're now slightly easing up a bit, were the headlines related to COVID-19, the virus, and every single image, this was insane, showed someone with a mask on, whether they were in at a church, whether they were, out in public, whether they're at a grocery store waiting for a test, you name it. Mask, 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 mask. Now, here's the thing about media outlets you have to understand. They're businesses. They don't make money unless they get eyeballs. So guess what? They sell a story that's going to rile people up, get people emotional, either make people fear or angry or happy, but usually it's the first two, not the latter. And so if you can sell a story that's got people afraid, they're gonna continue to read. And that's facts, that's not my opinion. However, it is my opinion that they continue to do this for the fear part. So, but it's facts from an economic standpoint, this is how media outlets work, right? So what I wanna do is I wanna dive into the facts surrounding this whole COVID pandemic crisis. And then what I would like for you to do is make up your own mind and decision. Don't allow any one media outlet to sway you just because of a political bias or a leaning. But just look at the facts. And I feel like when you look at them, you don't have to really worry as much as people are worrying. I went to Safeway just a second ago. There were probably 4 people in there without a mask. The rest were wearing masks and gloves. And I thought to myself, man, my life's good. Mostly because I don't want to wear one of those things all the time. And mostly because I don't need to. My immune system takes care of me, not a mask. But the first fact, right? The virus obviously originated in Wuhan, China. That is obvious now. They have wet markets over there. They were assuming or thinking that it could have come from a bat, but the Chinese people there do eat some pretty gnarly things. Everything that ranges from bats to dogs to snapping turtles to, you know, virus-infested rats and mice. Some things that you and I would look at and be like, that is disgusting, I would never touch it, but this is how viruses typically make their way into people. So I see why, you know, they would assume that was the case, but nothing has really been proven. No patient zero has been proven. And so the second fact is that Wuhan has an Institute of Virology. Now, this is one of the leading, you know, virology institutes in all of the nation. So anyone, you know, they say it's a conspiracy theory to think it came from there, but at the end of the day, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, patient zero could have accidentally been contaminated, walked right out with it. Who knows? You know, some people are even thinking that it was created here. To be honest, I don't know. I don't care. All I know is that that's an interesting coincidence, right? Number 3, and this was a huge one, which I think should be investigated further, which kind of the media is silent about now. On January 28th, Dr. Charles Lieber, basically the chair of biology and chemistry over at Harvard, was arrested for taking money from China. And this is, by the way, all happening at the exact same time. This is what's kind of freaking weird. Coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. You have to ask more questions, right?
And the U.S. is charging a top Harvard scientist along with 2 Chinese researchers over hiding China ties and payments. Edward Lawrence has more. Edward, what's going on here?
Now, the latest, as you said, the chair of the Harvard Chemistry and Chemical Biology Department facing 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines.
He also allegedly received more than $1.5 million to set up a research lab in China.
He was taking $50,000 per month from China, which he did not disclose to the authorities. Another $158,000 for living expenses. And he had 2 Chinese interns. Now, these Chinese interns were actually Chinese nationals.
Also charged today, 2 Chinese nationals. 29-year-old Yang Qingyi, who worked as a scientific researcher at Boston University,
who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army.
And they were arrested, and when their baggage was checked, they found 21 vials of biological matter
for trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China.
And one of their suitcases. You have to ask the question, what the heck's going on there? Why did they not tell us what was in that? I know that authorities investigated, yet everything's been silent. I mean, I feel like if there's a story breaking that's all going down around the same time, why do we not have more information on it? At one point in time during this whole pandemic, right after China, you know, had shared and disclosed that this thing was real with our nation, with the, you know, the nations of the world, Mr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, praises China in general for their transparency and the way that they handled this pandemic.
As I have said repeatedly since my return from Beijing, the Chinese government is to be congratulated for the extraordinary measures it has taken to contain the outbreak. In many ways, China is actually setting a new standard.
Now, what's interesting is fact number 5, the US intelligence agencies have proven that China has lied about this.
And there is a new report claiming that China sat on critical information for a number of days and that Beijing has been withholding crucial information.
U.S. intelligence officials tell CNN they are investigating another possible source, suggesting the virus may not have originated naturally as China has advertised, but rather that it possibly started in a Wuhan lab. Sources say it is one of many origin theories the U.S. is looking into.
So why is the World Health Organization praising China for its transparency when our own intelligence agencies have been stating, no, China number 1 should have told us a week beforehand, but they told us a week later. They said this is when we found out, when in reality they found out a week earlier. They've also lied about their numbers and their death rates.
A classified U.S. intelligence report concludes China is concealing the true extent of the COVID-19 outbreak in its country. Bloomberg News is reporting the communist government is intentionally understating the number of cases as the deaths from the virus. China's early reporting of COVID-19 influenced the global response.
We are now realizing that they were openly lying about data. And that's irresponsible at best. And arguably, you're jeopardizing the global response.
That makes absolute zero sense. Number 6, after China had been proven to lie, China officially says US reporters kicked out of China. Why?
This amounts to the largest expulsion of journalists in the post-Mao era, with China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs revoking these press cards for U.S. nationals working for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, which essentially means that most American journalists working at those newspapers have to leave China. As you mentioned, they will not be allowed to work in Hong Kong or Macau, which raises questions about Hong Kong's autonomy and its ability to control its media moving forward.
Why now, all of a sudden, when China seems to be doing everything right? If they were honest, would they kick out reporters from the US? China can't be trusted. Our government doesn't trust China. We're not asking enough questions about China or the origins of this thing. I think everyone just kind of blindly accepted what they're reading, and no one's looking deeper into Charles Liebert. Now, what's interesting to me is Donald Trump has been accused of a lot of things, right? He's not the nicest guy. I get it. If he hurts your feelings, I get it. From an economic standpoint, things are kind of terrible right now. Before they were great. You know, a virus and the drop in oil crashed our economy. But to say he did a bad job in handling this thing, well, you simply have to lack a bit of education. Why? Because on January 31st, Donald Trump said, we are closing off all borders and travel between China. Now, here's what's interesting. In the US, we had literally 7 on that day confirmed cases. To say he was doing a bad job at this point, I mean, I don't know what you would like.
Your criticism appears to be based in one thing, that Trump was overly optimistic. That's his style. You know, again, you can criticize it, that's fine. But it's not connected to the actions that were actually taken. Because if I back up even further, February 14th, CDC announces ongoing work with 5 laboratories to perform community-based influenza surveillance and study the spread of the virus. We're in a fact-finding mode in February. People forget this. People keep calling February this lost month. But it's really not. That's an easy and cheap accusation because there's no big, bold moves taken like there was in January or like there was in March. But the reality is our government was working to create that test. Now, did they work as fast as we would have liked? No, of course not. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm happy to go into. By March 3rd, there was only 102 cases in the United States. And yet I'm hearing criticism that we should have been locked down weeks earlier. But would you think the American people would have accepted that with only 100 cases in the United States? Italy didn't lock down until March 10th. Spain, not until March 14th. UK, not until later in March. Places like Sweden's never locked down. And so I provide all of that context as we try to basically accuse this man of he's being accused of having blood on his hands. And context is so important here.
And, the media goes nuts. They go ballistic. They say, hey, he's racist, he's xenophobic, the media outlets, politicians, you name it.
But neither should we panic or fall back on xenophobia. Labeling COVID-19 a foreign virus does not displace accountability for the misjudgments that have been taken thus far by the Trump administration.
And at the top of his to-do list lately is keeping people out of America, starting with supersizing the travel ban.
President Trump is planning to widen its controversial travel ban.
And many of them are ethnic Chinese, so you may feed a kind of racial response, a kind of xenophobia.
So let's look at the actual numbers, right? And these are the facts that I really want to share with you because this thing is no more severe than the flu. To date, we've had around 83,000 deaths in the US. Worldwide, we've had about 283,000 deaths. Of those deaths, 80% of the people that died were 65 years or older. In other words, older people. Well, guess what? Older people typically have existing health conditions, weaker immune systems. Now let's look at the numbers on the flu. The World Health Organization says that every single year worldwide, 290,000 to 650,000 people die of the novel flu, the common flu. So my question is, does this warrant, right, 300,000 deaths, warrant us shutting down the entire world? I mean, that many people die every year plus, every single year, of malaria in countries where they're underdeveloped, right? Where they don't have access to certain things. But the flu alone kills that many people. Now here's what's interesting. 70 to 80%, and this is their numbers, statistics, 70 to 80% of those exact same people, right, are 65 years and older. So this is almost exactly the same as the flu from a numbers standpoint. Whether or not we shut down borders, we didn't allow people to do it. Even at one point, they were saying that more and more people, right, are getting the virus from staying at home around other people.
New York State has released some pretty startling statistics. They say that more than half of people who were hospitalized with COVID-19 acquired the disease while also complying with those social distancing lockdown restrictions.
The study actually talked about the fact that these patients or these individuals were not leaving their home on a daily basis. So we're going to have to sort of dig into this data and figure out, were they leaving occasionally? Were they heading out? Were they continuing to have some social interaction and some exposure in their lives?
So just being a thinking person, an individual who likes to think and look at information and come to conclusions based on the facts and information, I think to myself, it's probably likely that the majority of people have already come into contact with this thing. And so it's not any worse than the flu. And the numbers don't prove anything that it is. It might be more contagious, that doesn't mean more people are dying. So let's look at now the solutions. Number one, social distancing, right?
They are cracking down on large gatherings in city parks to prevent exposure to COVID-19. The mayor says NYPD will drive around telling groups of people not to linger in city parks. Officers will go into grocery stores and other public spaces to encourage social distancing. State and local officials pleading for the federal government to act.
If the president doesn't act, people will die who could have lived otherwise.
De Blasio saying he's looking at taking stricter measures.
When we say you can go out for some exercise, we're not saying you can linger. We're not saying you can make a day of it.
Officials across the country stressing to their communities to heed the warnings.
My view is we die trying. I think the flattening of the curve, the social distancing, telling everybody just stay home gives us a real shot to keep the numbers down.
Let's shut down the entire world, the entire U.S. economy. You're not allowed in bars, you're not allowed in restaurants, you're not allowed in gyms, you're not allowed to conduct most businesses, you're not even allowed out in public in some places. Otherwise, they will arrest you if you tell them, I'm not going to listen to you, which is against the Constitution. Especially your freedom to assemble. I get it, you have to have a permit. So I'm not telling people to go and do this stuff, to just fight the man. I'm simply saying that I feel like our basic human rights are kind of just being stomped all over in the name of public safety. The safety of your brothers, the safety of your mothers, the safety of your neighbors. It's interesting. So social distancing is number one. Two, wear a mask. Now, Dr. Fauci, Brad Pitt's hero, personal hero, has stated in a video that masks really aren't effective. Check this out.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course. But when you think masks, you should think of healthcare providers needing them and people who are ill.
Yet if you go onto the Instagram profile of the CDC or even local governments, or in California where I was at for that matter, you're not allowed to almost do anything without a mask.
Everyone in a public setting must wear a facial covering. And this means that everyone who enters a business must have a facial covering. Anyone that is on a bus or the trolley or waiting at a bus stop must wear a facial covering. And of course, the recommendation that if you leave your place, cover your face. In other words, you should wear facial coverings anytime you leave your home or encounter someone that is not within your immediate household.
So why would they want people to put a mask on and stay home? If more people are getting COVID from being home, number one, which has been proven, and two, wearing a mask, you're just gonna touch your face more. Is it to make other people feel safe? Or my question is it to create more fear and hysteria around something? Because when you look at everyone else wearing a mask and you're not wearing a mask, natural human response is, oh my gosh, I'm freaked out. You know, it's just this herd mentality. And then the third and final thing, vaccines.
The race for a coronavirus vaccine is on.
The human trials of the promising Oxford University coronavirus vaccine continues to move at warp speed. So too does the race to produce and distribute it on a mass scale.
Human clinical trials are now underway in the UK, the US, Germany, and China. So many potential vaccines, it's possible there could eventually be more than one that works.
Right, they've been saying, you know, we're really rushing this process to get a vaccine done. And personally, I'm not for vaccines in most situations. I think my best vaccine, my best treatment is gonna be my own immune system. And I will not be getting a vaccine for this coronavirus, and mostly because I just don't trust the people involved. I don't trust Dr. Anthony Fauci. I don't trust Bill Gates, who recently was praised on The Daily Show and asked all sorts of questions taken very seriously, who funds 7 pharmaceutical companies working on a vaccine right now.
I understand that your organization is actually supporting 7 different vaccine research efforts right now. Thank you for doing that for all of us.
We've thought about the epidemic. We did fund some things to be more prepared, like a vaccine effort. Our early money can accelerate things. So for example, there's, of all the vaccine constructs, the 7 most promising of those, even though we'll end up picking at most 2 of them, we're gonna fund factories for all 7.
And it's just interesting to me that Bill Gates would say something like this.
Because until we get almost everybody vaccinated globally, we still won't be fully back to normal.
Yet at the same time, he's not a doctor. Trump is denounced for saying he's not a doctor.
That's hydroxychloroquine and erythromycin. And again, you have to go through your medical people, get the approval. But I've seen things that I sort of like. So what do I know? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor.
Okay, here's what I don't get. Trump is acknowledging he's not a doctor, while legitimate doctors who could answer these questions are standing right there next to him. Why are we getting his opinion at all?
Talk about double standard. I mean, to attack a guy for not being a doctor, but then to ask a guy who's not a doctor, right, questions about this deal just because he's been a philanthropist for 10 years doesn't mean he's a doctor. Now, the next question I'd have is, why are 46 companies that are all multi-billion-dollar companies ranging from $850 billion down to $1.2 billion is the lowest, and everything in between, working on vaccines, working on treatments, and working on testing? These companies don't do it for free. My idea here is that Bill Gates isn't doing it for free either. I simply don't trust the guy. So I'm gonna share an idea here. I wouldn't be shocked if come September time, when they rush to get these vaccines out to everybody, that Bill Gates somehow wasn't at the forefront of this deal, and that the FDA approved his because it was obviously the one that worked, and they didn't approve others that might have worked. That's my opinion, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all. As a matter of fact, I would challenge you to look to see if that's actually what's gonna happen, or if that happens, you know, months from now. To top it all off, the president of Tanzania had some testing kits come in for the COVID virus. He tested a couple of different things. He actually tested a lot of things, but the 2 things that really stood out that were shocking were, 1, a goat tested positive for COVID-19, and a pawpaw fruit, a freaking fruit tested positive for COVID-19.
Tanzanian President John Magufuli has dismissed coronavirus tests being used in the country as faulty after they returned positive results on samples taken from a goat and a pawpaw. Magufuli, whose government has drawn criticism for being secretive about the outbreak, said the COVID-19 tests had been imported from abroad and that he had asked the security services to check their quality. They had randomly obtained several non-human samples, including from a pawpaw, a goat and a sheep, but assigned them human names and ages. The samples were then submitted to a laboratory with, according to Magufuli, the goat and pawpaw testing positive. At an event in northwest Tanzania, Magufuli said this showed that some people were being told they had the virus when they had not been infected.
Number one, who's holding that data? Who gets to keep that data? Who gets to keep all that stuff? That's the first thing. The second thing is, what are their guidelines around testing? I feel like there should be very stringent guidelines around how a testing kit is developed and how accurate it is. I just have a lot of questions. But at the end of the day, my biggest question, my most major concern is what happens to our democracy after this? What happens to the republic that our forefathers fought so hard to build? What happens to our freedoms? What happens when they start to implement, you're not allowed to go into this building and that building unless you've been tested or have the vaccine, or you have this app that shows you haven't been in contact with anyone. I mean, that's complete authoritarianism. That is George Orwell style 1984 crap. And I believe that this is just the beginning of that if we don't become educated ourselves, if we don't fight back, if we don't say, I'm not taking your vaccines, I don't trust these people in charge, I don't trust a lot of the media outlets, I don't care what side they are. At the end of the day, the facts don't prove that this thing, in my opinion, warrants the social distancing, the masks, the economic shutdowns. Who are you killing? I think this is the funniest thing. Who are you killing every single time you go out? Well, my entire life I've gone out when the flu's been out, and not once have I ever felt guilty about it. People are going to die. As sad as that is, people are going to die, especially if they're older. It's just life. Accept it. You're not going to allow, I don't want to allow the government to walk all over my freedom to do what I choose to do for the safety of a 65 plus year old person. If they're afraid, or if you're afraid, you stay inside. But don't tell everyone else to, and sure as hell don't tell the government to tell me to. So that being said, that's my opinion. Something just feels off. I have a lot of questions. I hope you do too. I hope after looking at the facts and information, you start to ask more questions. And the last thing I'll say is check out this little short clip where Elon Musk is being interviewed by Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think that's like we should be concerned about anything that's a massive infringement on our civil liberties.
Yes.
So it's like you got to put a lot of weight on that. A lot of people died to, win independence for the country and fight for the democracy that we have, and we should treasure that and not give up our liberties too easily. I think I think we probably did that actually. So,
well, I like what you said when you said that it should be a choice, and that to require people to stay home, require people to not go to work, and to arrest people for trying to make a living. This all seems wrong, and I think
yes.
It's a wrong approach. It's an infantilization of the society. That daddy's going to tell you what to do.
Fundamentally, a violation of the Constitution.
Yes.
Freedom of assembly, and it's just. I mean, I don't think these things stand up in court really.